Today I'm going to look at the bean bed. We're going to look specifically at growing peas actually today because it's a little bit early to sow beans or plant beans out. Um, but they'll all go into this legume bed where I've prepared the soil. We've had quite a bit of rain and the soil's crumbled down quite nicely. But as you can see from the surface, it doesn't have to be too fine for beans and peas. Just looking at some potatoes popping up from last year, I must have left them in the soil. These are called rogue potatoes. I actually don't weed them out at this stage. I save them for a little bit longer, and then you can get really, really baby new potatoes by sort of lifting them out just 2 or 3 weeks time. It's not probably the greatest, the best practice because potatoes can carry virus, but it helps me to eke out my potato supply right the way, bridging the gap from finishing the last year's potatoes to the new potatoes. Just looking back there was where the beans grew last year. I'm following them onto this bed this year. Now, most beans and peas are climbers, apart from dwarf French beans and broad beans. If I'm going to sow some sugar snap peas today, and they're quite short climbers, but they need something to scramble up. So I like making a sort of freestyle scrambling frame out of hazel or willow or birch. This is hazel that I'm using today. These are just some young stems that I cut from our coppiced hazel a few weeks ago. To be fair, birch is a better material. It's a bit more flexible, and I find that hazel is slightly more brittle and difficult to work with. But you can literally do this with no skills whatsoever. I guess it helps a little bit if you're used to manipulating young stems for willow weaving, but it's completely freestyle, and I just wind things together and tie them in, and then it sort of lasts you for one growing season, and you can make some quite interesting decorative supports for all kinds of climbers and herbaceous perennials using hazel and birch. But we don't have any birch, so ours is mainly going to be made out of hazel. I'm sowing sugar snap peas because they are really versatile. When they're young, you eat them in the pods, so there's no waste. And if you do forget them and leave the plants for a couple of weeks or maybe even less without harvesting, and the pods begin to swell, you can shell them and use them as peas. And I find personally that when I grow peas, they're short-lived, they take up quite a lot of space, and the crop isn't brilliant. But either way, the sowing method is the same, and you might be able to see here I've made 2 drills either side of this support system. I'm growing them as a double row, and I'm only growing half a row of them because I don't use that many. And I've made the drill about 2 to 3 centimeters deep. It's a bit deeper than for sowing carrots, for example, that we've already seen. And I used this time this draw hoe to make these drills in the soil. You can see remnants of a bonfire on the surface there. That's going to help with the nutrients and potash. But beans and peas make their own nitrogen in the soil, and they're a really, really important part of the crop rotation and managing soil fertility. But I shall come on to that a bit later on. Here I've sown my peas fairly thickly, actually, probably closer than I want them. But you might find with peas and beans, they don't all germinate. They have a fairly short viability, and also they get stolen by mice and other rodents and things if you've got them about, which most of us do. And when the peas and beans start growing, their roots form association with specialist bacteria in the soil that help to assimilate nitrogen and fix it into the soil in a form that plants can obtain. I'm just covering them over here, as you can see, and I'm not going to water because there's rain forecast for the evening. I'm doing this in the middle of April, and they're perfectly hardy, and they should get going in a couple of weeks or so. But later on I shall be filling this patch with other types of bean, mostly climbing beans, which I've got a particular interest in, and I've got a big collection of different varieties from around the world. So watch this space. We'll be coming back to this bed a bit later on and talking a bit more about legumes.